Hey everybody, welcome to Ignition Community Live. This is our presentation on new perspective, moving from vision to perspective.
Good morning, JC Harrison. I'm the Director of Systems Engineering at Raceline & Associates. We've been using Ignition since 2010, and we're happy to present this. I hope everybody learned something from it.
I'm Tyler Huffman. I've been with Raceline for about 6 or 7 months now. Been working with perspective pretty much since I started. I started on Ignition 8, so all of my experience is coming directly from learning perspective rather than from moving from vision to perspective.
Hello, my name is Philip Warner. I've been with Raceline for a little over 4 years now. Started with Ignition back in 7.8, so I was doing vision for a while, and now recently have pretty much just been focused on perspective with the 8.0 release.
Hey guys, my name's Roy. I'm the engineering manager in over Europe. I've been working with Raceline for about 8 years now, and Ignition from quite an older version, maybe 8 years as well. So quite a bit of experience, mainly with the vision side, to be fair. Only just started doing perspective like most people, I suppose. But yeah, looking forward to hearing what Phil and Tyler have to say for us.
All right, awesome. Moving on to today's topic. Phil, if you want to take it.
So for today's topic, we're kind of going to be going over a bunch of things that we've learned from first developing in vision and then developing in perspective, and how our things change, how our mindsets have to change. So first off, we want to give an overview of how we can do a rapid development of a screen in vision compared to perspective, and the kind of things you need to take into account when you do that. Second, our component usage, containers in perspective. If anybody that out there has used perspective much, you'll know that containers are a huge deal, and not so much in vision. So just kind of go over how we have incorporated those, along with some property configurations to deal with things like extension functions, changing, and other things. Then Tyler's going to talk to you about some mobile functionality and what to consider when designing a screen for a desktop mode, to also make it translate well to a mobile version of the same screen, to make sure that the data is still there in a readable format. Then finally, we're going to talk about some useful features that we found in perspective that we really like to use, that maybe weren't as either not used at all or not used as much in vision. So first off, the screen design. Kind of have a motto back when I was making a vision screen of make it work, then make it pretty. So when I talk to the customer and maybe they want a new screen that wasn't part of the original plan, first we try to talk to them and find out what exactly they want to show. And then I usually would just drag stuff on the screen, as you can see on the picture below, and just make a button, get the data that we would want to show on the screen. And then once the data is coming in proper, then we would build the screen to make it look more like an actual live production project screen. But now in perspective, as I was talking about earlier with containers, it's shifted more to a make it pretty then make it work kind of development. Because if you throw everything on the screen and get it working and then move everything around, put it in containers, delete containers, you're gonna have to redo all your reference pathing and stuff, and that can be very time consuming. So it's a lot more efficient to plan out your screen ahead of time and then move on from there. So this is a vision screen that we have in a project running 7.9. Just one of our typical screens. We have the same screen in perspective. The main difference between screens is when we get them done and we show them to the customer, how do you like it? What do you want to change? On the previous screen, the vision screen, if they wanted stuff moved around, it was 2-second change, move stuff around, hit save, and there you go. Whereas on the perspective screen, one of the examples is the retrieve data button. Actually used to be below the end date, and when they requested to move it up so we can make the bar chart bigger, we ended up throwing it in a flex container and then having to rebind all the pathing in that button for all the tables and the chart, which is a lot more, well, I shouldn't say a lot, a little more time consuming than in vision. But I think overall the look is a lot cleaner, which is one of the main reasons we've switched.
If you've worked with Vision, you know that when you're designing a screen, you're pretty much only going to be using just one container when you're building your screens, unless it's for specific cases, that one being the root container. And you can see here in the project hierarchy that we have just the view, the root container, and then all of the components just added onto the root container. This makes it really easy to move things around and restructure the entire page without having to change any references, because everything's still going to be in the same base container. But when you move over to perspective, it all changes up a little bit. The coordinate container is not commonly used, at least in our applications. We generally will start with some flex containers because it allows your components to scale and move along with whatever size screen you're looking at, whereas Vision's a bit more static. So when using flex containers, in order to align everything, you're going to want to nest flex containers into other flex containers, and it ends up giving you a really clean look at the cost of a little bit of development time. Because if you have to move components from one flex container to a different one, it's going to change any other components reference to that one. So for example, here in our Vision screen, we developed this entire screen and we got it looking how the customer wanted. And then after we developed it, they wanted this part number table added in. And we said, sure, why not? That's no problem. We added it in, got it all working. That was very simple, very quick. All we had to do is get the table in and get the data right. In perspective, we would have had to add in another flex container here and divide this whole flex container into two so that we could put another table here. And while that's not that much more difficult, any references to this table would need to be updated. So this graph, for example, is pulling data from this table. We would need to go into the binding and change that. The button that writes to this table, we would need to go into the script and change that as well. This screen, it wouldn't have been that much harder to do that, but with more complicated screens, it can get a bit more hectic to try and track everything down. Another thing to pay attention to here is just the general flow of the screen. We've talked about using flex containers in our perspective projects, but what it ends up kind of looking like is we've got our main root container here that includes everything in it. Then we have 3 flex containers here, one for the header, one for the upper part with all the drop downs, data entry fields and the table, and one below for the graph. And this upper one is divided into 2 along this line, split up into the table and all the data entry fields. Then this flex container here is also divided into 2, and then we have new flex containers building along. We have a new flex container for each line as well. That allows everything to keep kind of lined up and make it look really nice as a final project. Moving on to another screen that we designed in Vision. This is a good example of kind of making it work first. When you look at it, you see that, I mean, it's working. It definitely gets the job done, but it could look a little bit better. I mean, at first glance, it just looks a little busy with the excess of borders and the abundance of like neon yellows and greens. And combine all this with the black background and you get a screen that can be a little bit tough to look at. However, it is functional and there's no major reason why we would need to go back and change this. Now, if you're migrating your project from Vision to perspective, you kind of have a golden opportunity to take a look at the screens that you built in Vision and decide what needs to be updated. Because since you're going to be pulling pretty much the same data for both screens, you can spend maybe a little bit more time developing the look of it. And that's kind of what we did here. We're getting pretty much the same data in, but we decided to get rid of the neon yellows, get rid of a lot of the borders, make everything look a little bit more open, and not go with as dark of a black on the screen. And the final product ends up looking easy to look at, a bit less busy, and I think in general, it just looks a lot better.
Another thing that just changing from vision to perspective is we used a lot of extension functions on stuff like the bar chart you can see down there to dynamically change colors of bars, add a target line, even control the look and feel of the numeric labels. And in perspective, what we found through a lot of trial and error and reading the forums is that all this functionality can be actually achieved through the properties that are already listed in the property panel for these components. So like controlling your bar colors now, there's just a derived data from fields property. And what we do when we build out our data array, we add a component or a value called color, and then just you do the calculations to figure out what color it should be beforehand, and then set a hex code into that field, and then we can tell the derived fields from data to look at the color, the name property color from our data, and it will automatically fill it in. Another thing seen in the other picture there on the right is coloring a table cell based on the value in that cell. So over on the data with the Lash average, you can see there's a style and a value. So I didn't even, when I was first doing this, I didn't know that this was possible, but you can put a style on every cell in your table and have it look however you want. So that's kind of neat, and we no longer need to have all the extension functions with codes on them, which a lot of times in Vision would also require a advanced knowledge of like the J-free charts and stuff like that to change all the options and properties. So we no longer need that, which is great. This is just an example of a screen that had a lot of extension functions, J-free chart code to make all the colors and the labels look how we wanted. There's tooltips that we didn't get the picture of here that are formatted based on which chart you're hovering over to give you names and additional data that a normal tooltip wouldn't. And then the next slide, our perspective screen, which you can see is pretty much the same, done without extension functions. The only major change here is that our target line is no longer just a horizontal line that we add in with code. It's an actual separate series on the chart that we just set to be a line render and give it a constant value when we build out our data sets.
One completely new aspect of perspective design is the addition of mobile functionality for any one of your projects. This will come with its own set of unique challenges, completely separate from anything that you may have dealt with previously. And here we thought it would be a good idea to discuss some of the practices that we have adopted when building our applications for use on some mobile platforms. One thing to pay attention to when you're designing a screen for a mobile platform is space. Obviously, that's the first thing that may come to mind because you're going to have less horizontal space available. So really each piece of real estate on that screen is going to have much higher value. This is kind of where you need to look at your screens and you need to decide, what information do I really need on here? What components do I need to keep and which ones should go? Because the way that people are going to be using this are just pulling it up on their phone kind of on the fly, and you want to make sure that they have all the information that they're going to need to see whenever they need to see it. And you generally get the best results from just talking with the people who are actually going to be using this stuff, see what they like from the desktop views, and then you can add them into the mobile views. In terms of UI, it's important to remember that people won't be using this mobile app with a stylus, so you're going to want to keep your buttons small. You're going to want to use scrolling and not require a lot of inputs on things that may be hard to click, because people are just going to use their thumbs to navigate through this. So keep that in mind when you're building it out. And also, people generally just prefer scrolling over some smaller components. So we personally like to build out our mobile screens vertically, just so you can scroll through them, grab all the information that you need. It makes it a lot easier, and it goes a long way with the customer whenever they end up using those mobile apps. And finally, scalability. Different phones and different tablets are going to have different base resolutions, and this can cause some issues if you don't account for some of the smaller ones in particular. Like if you build your screens to work with a 640p resolution and something's using 540p, it's going to be a bit of an issue because some of your components are going to look squished. What we would recommend is building out your screens for the smallest phone resolution that you can think of, at least horizontally. Once again, they should be able to scroll through it fine. So vertically, that's not a problem. But building out your screens for the smallest phone resolution that you think people will be using, and then allowing the components to grow so that they can scale up to larger phones and tablets. So just an example of building vertically. You can see here on this screen, it's nice and spread out. All the information's available just on the base screen. You can take a look at it and get whatever you need to see from it. But when you move over to a vertical or to a mobile screen, obviously you're not going to put both of these columns here side by side because people would have to scroll sideways through that, or we'd have to use maybe the carousel component for that. And yeah, people just prefer scrolling up and down. So we just stack the components on top of each other. It's simple, but it works. I wanted to discuss, when talking about designing mobile views, try to avoid as much as possible when you're building out these views over styling. It can be a little bit tough because with perspective, you have this great style selector tool with a lot of options that you can customize your screens to look exactly how you like, and people can kind of go crazy with it at first. I know I definitely did. You can make some screens that look pretty cool, but a lot of it's just very unnecessary. So when you're looking on these screens, you see it's all kind of built out in grayscale, very easy to look at, nothing's kind of in your face, except for this one part right here, because this is probably the most important thing that you'll be seeing on this screen. And this is a benefit of not overstyling your views, because you can draw somebody's eye to a specific part by using just a little bit of color. And that point is even more important on a mobile view, because once again, somebody's going to just be using this on the fly. They're going to open up their phone, go to the view, and they want to grab the information that they need and then put their phone back in their pocket. So here I kept everything grayscale and just use the color to tell them the machine state. So it's green because it's running, it'd be yellow if it was in standby, and red if it was faulted. It's just a really easy way to draw somebody's eye to important pieces of data. Finally, talking about the removal of components when moving to a mobile view. This can be a bit more of a difficult decision that needs to be made when designing a screen for use on a mobile platform. You need to kind of decide which components are available on the desktop, which components that are available on the desktop need to be cut for sake of space on the mobile view. It's a little difficult because you spend time developing all these cool components and functions that you're excited for people to use and stuff like that. But when it comes time to build the mobile view, you kind of realize that you can't fit all of it. Reasonably, you can't fit all of it on the mobile view. So this is kind of when you need to take a look at your screens from the perspective of an operator, somebody who's going to actually be using these, and you need to decide what information needs to stay on these screens and what can go. For example, here, I spent a decent amount of time building out all of this information, writing the scripts for it, and we have this nice Pareto chart that shows the time that it was in each state for each hour. And it wouldn't really make sense. And when moving over to the mobile view, if I had kept that Pareto chart in there, it would have squished all the other components to the side. And it wouldn't really make sense to build it out vertically and put that Pareto chart below the rest of these lines. So I decided, you know what, we've got the event durations here. I can keep that. I can get rid of the Pareto chart and make sure everything still looks nice in the mobile view. These are just some things that I've found when developing my screens for desktop and mobile view that have helped me kind of build better views for the operators to use.
All right, so here's some of the useful tools that we've found when developing in perspective. One of them, message handlers. It was also in Vision, but we're using it a lot more now in perspective. The main way we use it is to deal with pop-ups within a view. Beforehand, Vision has just a function where you can call it confirm box, and it'll then automatically pass back whether you click confirm or cancel. Now what we do is we open up a pop-up that we've made that has the same functionality, a confirm and a cancel button, but depending on what button you push, it will activate a message handler to send back the choice and run the proper script based on your choice.
Yeah, another new function in perspective is the addition of style classes. These style classes are something that you can create that you can easily apply to components throughout different pages. It's really useful for setting up things like backgrounds and the size of fonts throughout headers and stuff. And they can be a huge time saver for the project. And it can also give it a bit of a sense of continuity because each of your screens are going to look pretty similar. The important thing to make note of here is not to overutilize them. For example, we generally don't set up font size on these, font size or font style on these, because it's most commonly overridden due to the sizing of different components on these views.
Finally, on this screen, we got the transforms, which is pretty much one of my favorite new features. One of the main things that we like to do, or we like from it, is being able to see the output down at the bottom there. We have boxed in red, so we know that if we're going to error out or not, we can fix it right away, first time through, get it working the way we want. Previous to that, what we had to do in Vision is create a custom property, make a property change script that only executed when that custom property changed. Essentially, for testing, we'd force the change to happen and then get the error message and go and fix wherever there's errors or bugs. And then when we were done, we'd have to push the output back to a secondary custom property so that we could then use it the way we wanted to. Here, all that is done in one quick, easy setup.
Another thing that I've found personally pretty useful when building out screens in perspective is property change scripts. At first, I wasn't using them a ton, but after a while, I found some new ways to use it. And one of them being this custom property you see here called DB pull. This is something that you're going to find on almost every one of my screens that I build out. I create this, I make it a Boolean property, and I put a change script on it. And from there, I write the entire script for the core functionality of that view. And it makes it really easy to call from anywhere else on the screen. So if any of these properties change, you can see the little change script icon here. They're going to trigger this DB pull function, which will refresh the data on the page. This makes it really easy for troubleshooting your project. If you go back like a week later, you don't have to go through and click on all these different buttons and everything. You can just go into this change script, figure out what's going on, and fix it. And it also allows you to trigger refreshes on these pages whenever any global variable session properties change. Like if you have a custom date range selector and it controls multiple different views, you can just send out a message whenever that changes and use a message handler to refresh this. And there's really so many more uses for change scripts that I'm not going to be able to cover throughout the 30 or so more minutes we have here. It's a really nice function, and I definitely recommend checking it out if you're starting to develop in perspective.
One of the things we've been working with the 8.0 perspective module since pretty early on in its life, and we've noticed some issues when we were trying to convert from Vision to perspective that may have been fixed by now, but we found workarounds that we're still working perfectly. So we're just going to cover those in case you guys are seeing some of the same things in your projects. But the first one is on a table component in perspective, we initially just bound the data set object like we would in Vision to the data property, and it would display fine. However, we found that when we were pulling large time spans of data, several thousand rows in the data set would be returned, we get the screen would become very unresponsive. Like you'd click a drop down and you'd see nothing. The other one we have are for loops and while loops. So a lot of the code we were trying to just convert into perspective and just change as little as possible. But we noticed that we had a lot of for loops in our scripts in Vision, and it never really caused an issue. But when we put it into perspective, we noticed that it was taking considerably longer to execute those scripts. So what we ended up having to do is optimize our database queries and try to do more within a for loop than we were before. So if we needed to do a loop, we'd do a couple things at a time instead of just one thing at a time, move on to the next. And along those lines, the name queries nowadays perspective, if you want to bind something to a database query, you have to have a name query associated with what you want to get. You can no longer just use a query builder and write it out, which we find is actually much more helpful, because if we want to change something across the whole project, we just change it in the name query and it all comes through just like it normally would with the updates. And then finally, since Ignition 8 is still fairly new, they're pushing updates, minor revisions pretty regularly. We suggest having a plan if you're using third-party modules or anything like that to revert any updates you do back to your last stable version. We had some instances where we would update to the newest minor revision, but that would break the third-party modules, so we'd have to go back. So just keep that in mind when you're looking to update to the newest Ignition version.
Which do you prefer, Vision or Perspective for overall flexibility? Phil, I'm gonna let you take that one because you have experience with both.
Right. So Vision, it's what I started with, and kind of got my what I have my habits built around, good or bad. So it works. What I like about Perspective is it is more flexible in the long run. It's just learning everything new and stuff that I don't know about yet, because I don't know what I don't know. I think overall down the road, Perspective will be much better than Vision.
Yeah, I agree. I think Perspective is a very flexible application. It can do quite a bit, and a lot of the components have functionalities that you might not really be aware about when you first start using it, that we've just had to search through on the forums and everything to find out. But it does have a bit of a learning curve. So if you have experience with Vision, Vision's definitely more flexible since you already know how to use it. How much time does it usually take to recreate a Vision screen in Perspective? I would say it doesn't take that long if you know how you already want to format it. If you're going to format it the exact same way, it's a pretty quick process. You just kind of have to think about how you're going to get the data in. You have these new tools like transforms, change scripts, and message handlers to work with. So it's more of a question of how you want to approach things that might take you a little bit longer. Overall, designing the screen shouldn't take that much longer, maybe a few hours a day once you know how to design everything.
Can you explain more about how to use the array data on a table component? So when I'm building one out, I think of it more as a list of dictionaries. You just build out a dictionary essentially with all the different entries, the fields you'd want, and you can just make it a list for each row. You can put in extra stuff that you would never use in your table, but then can reference elsewhere. And I've done that a lot. It's more useful than just showing data on a table. You can actually put other stuff in, kind of like how we were talking with the bar color and stuff like that.
Are there any design challenges or strategies that you're still battling or hoping to learn more about? A lot of the challenges that we run into are, since Perspective is so new, we do run into bugs occasionally that we'll post on the forums, and generally Inductive is great about getting to those and fixing those if there are any big issues. In terms of challenges that we're battling that don't really involve bugs, I would say there aren't a ton, Phil, unless you can think of some. Perspective it's pretty well fleshed out. You can do a lot with it.
I think the main thing is when I'm searching the forums on how to do something and see that how people have done it, and it just never would have come across in my mind to do that stuff, like adding a style to an individual cell in a table to get the colors. So it's just kind of trying to train my mind to work that way with all the properties and how to build out your data to be flexible and work with everything that Perspective can offer.
Yeah, I like that point you brought up about kind of battling your mind there a little bit, because if you worked with vision, moving to Perspective, you kind of have to put a lot of your vision knowledge by the wayside, because it is a very different module. It's going to take a little bit of time to learn, and thinking of how you might do something in vision, it may not be the same in Perspective.
We got a question here asking any knowledge of a desktop application to host Perspective projects. I'm assuming you're kind of getting at like how they have the iPhone application and Android applications for running on mobile. Are you looking for like a similar thing for desktop? Because right now all we use is just the web browser, a normal web browser, to bring up our Perspective projects.
We just hop into Chrome or Firefox and toss it up there. But no, we don't really know anything about a desktop application right now. Curious on that do pull property with the property change script. Why not do that as a custom method?
It's just, I think that's just a carryover from how we designed our projects in the past with the custom properties and property change scripts. So one of Tyler's first jobs when he joined Raceline was to take our vision screens and make them Perspective screens. So I think it just kind of got carried over, and we didn't update to using a custom method. But it is definitely something that can be done.
Let's see, from Michael Betts, what have you found to be the most difficult when converting from vision to Perspective? Getting used to Flex containers was a big one. I think when I first started using Perspective, my initial reaction was just to open up a coordinate container and try and align everything in there. And it ends up not looking too great. And it's a big hassle to get everything looking right. When I was converting screens over from vision to Perspective, just using all the new functions to try and get things in the right format for the screens was a bit more tough than I expected it to be when I first started out. Phil, what would you say was the most difficult when converting?
When I first started, it was the making sure the paths were right, because referencing the objects was a lot different. But when we got the ability to, that was pretty early on in the beta early access. We got the ability to essentially just get a drop down and link out that way. It got a lot easier. But making sure that I don't use any database queries where it's just hand typed out in the scripts and then run, making sure that the name queries and optimize them properly was always a big challenge.
And limiting the use of for loops was a big one, because like Phil said, we used those pretty heavily throughout the vision projects that I was converting over. Trying to limit those in the new projects that I'm building can be a little bit difficult.
Question, Tyler, about what mobile devices are people using the most? Because I know around here it's pretty much just the phone, but you've dealt with a lot more mobile projects than I have.
Yeah, when I see people using these devices to access the project, I would say, the iPad is pretty much the go-to for like site managers and stuff. If people have it and they already use it, they're going to be using the iPad. Other than that, just your standard smartphone, your Samsung Galaxies, your iPhones, those are pretty common. I would say for hybrid laptops, they'd probably be using the desktop views. Yeah, just standard mobile devices that most people have, your iPads and your iPhones. People are going to mainly be using those.
Question, if you could change one thing about Perspective to make it easier to use, what would it be? And I think for me, it'd have to be the deep select option. So when you get containers within containers within containers, and you just have to double click your way down, or you can go through the window browser and path that way. But I'd like to see if there's some sort of way where it can detect that you're over a button, and when I click on the button, it automatically goes to that component. If I click in white space around the button, then maybe go to the Flex container that is next level. That would be my one thing that I'd like.
Yeah, it takes a while to drill down into those, especially when you have like 4 Flex containers before the button. Yeah, I agree that that would be something that I'd like to change about perspective as well. Because when you have so many Flex containers on a view, it takes a while to drill down.
Then we got a question about any pointers for user management and perspective, such as rosters, roles, etc. The main way that we're using the users here is more of a generalized sense. So all our line supervisors have a supervisor login. It's just one supervisor login. Team leaders have one, and then your plant staff, your plant manager, ops manager, engineering manager, will all have theirs. And so we set up roles that way, and then put limiting features, security zones based on those rules. We don't really do individual users can access certain things. So it's not really as fleshed out as you can get with the Ignition users. Are you guys doing it anywhere different, Tyler, on your sites?
No, I mean, yeah, we're pretty much just using the roles and zones.
Okay, so we just had a clarification on that last question, meaning they wanted to know about updating users in the runtime. So adding people, taking them away, changing. And I'd have to say, no, we haven't done that since we use just a generalized login scheme right now. We have plans to go to use the customer's Active Directory. We just have not implemented it yet.
We'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. We're really glad that we could share some of the stuff that we've learned throughout our time working with Perspective. And we hope you guys take some of these tips and put them into your own projects. And we hope it works out well for you.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I hope we could have at least provided some help to you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, definitely. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and hope you guys have a great rest of your day.